I would like to invite Imelda, where are you? Imelda Minnock, another one of my very young students, and I would like her on my editorial team, as I told you before. She's very good at spotting where we need to improve, and her story is Weirdo.
I'm not usually a loner. I have plenty of reason to, but for the most part I struggle on and keep my mouth shut. Truthfully, things haven't been too bad lately. After what had happened, it was almost a relief to be put into this hellhole of school. Well, nearly. I told myself that was great, just like St. Clair's or Mallory Towers or even Hogwarts, and I always wanted to go to a boarding school. But, despite the rich, snobby English girls without a brain between them, who saw me as the fresh Irish Colleen who hadn't got a clue about the social classes in boarding schools, I got on fairly well. And it wasn't like I really wanted to be one of them. They addressed everyone as darling, for God's sake. They bought pets to match their outfits. Mauve rabbits were so ill, and spent their time plotting how they would get Prince Harry to marry them. They considered Prince William too old. The boys were into nothing but girls and sport, but as that was all any teenage boy was into, I didn't consider it too weird. I was the one who was considered weird. I was the Irish nerd who arrived slap bang in the middle of the first term without a penny to her name. Somehow the fact that the authorities were paying for my tuition had leaked out, and the girls thought it was highly amusing. Anyway, today'd be a bad day by anyone's standards. I'd actually got a detention. A detention! Anyway, who cared, I thought savagely, barely resisting kicking something as I walked into the common room that was shared by roughly 40 pupils. And the truth was, nobody really did care. I tried to imagine telling Annie I'd got a detention, but that just made me feel lonely, so I hastily turned to other matters. I looked around and winced. Celia and a couple of other brain-dead Barbie clones were sitting in one corner of the room discussing some new boy that was arriving tonight. We had all received a speech about making him feel welcome, etc., etc., but it looked like the girls were going to give him an extra special hello. "He's gorgeous," Holly whispered conspiratorially. "I saw him in the principal's office about an hour ago. He's so my type." "But darling," Celia pouted, "you already have Mark. I think I should have the newbie." And although Honey and a couple of other girls looked mutinous, I knew that Celia would have him, because what Celia wanted, Celia got. Snorting in my own head, I tiptoed out again, feeling sorry for the unnamed boy who in a few hours' time would be ensnared by girls that were experts at catching the species. I glanced at my watch and groaned. The library would be closing soon, and I hadn't finished my book. Couldn't take it out because of names, but not unknown people would most certainly take it. I dumped it on the shelf and hurried back to the crowded living room. I couldn't even see the new boy, but I could guess he was somewhere inside the gaggle of girls that surrounded one of the couch. Some of them moved away, and I caught a profile of his back. Amazement and surprise flowed through me. "Stephen," I blurted before I could stop myself. He turned around at the sound of his name and grinned. "Alice," he said, surprised. "Long time, no see."
Thank you very much, Imelda. I'm going to invite Caroline up now, Caroline Soup. And Caroline works a lot with drama and film scripts. And today, she's also a brilliant prose writer as well. Today she's going to read from a prose story called The Yellow Chevrolet.
The yellow Chevrolet noisily sped up the deserted road. The Minnesota sun beat down on the surface of the track, with dirt flying to the air in the trail of the vehicle. Fresh reeds shook as the car raced by. AC/DC's Best blared from the Chevy, attracting the attention of cattle from the nearby fields. "I'm on the highway to hell," two young girls sang out their windows. Lily took one hand off the steering wheel to brush a black strand of hair behind her ear. Suddenly, the radio died. Silence. "Ah," Emily moaned. "That's the end of that." "Well, you were completely out of tune," Lily grinned. It was the first time since Christmas vacation that they had been home. Though Emily's parents would be delighted to see their only daughter, it was a different story for Lily. It took so much for Lily to come back and face the music again. Emily's influence was stronger than she had anticipated. "Damn radio," Lily muttered, giving it a gentle fist. Throwing a leg up onto the dashboard, Emily continued to grin as they drove through the prairies. "What's with you? You that happy to be home?" Lily frowned, not taking her eyes off the road. Exhaling slowly, Emily rubbed her leg with one hand while combing her fingers through her blonde hair. I am happy, Lily, and believe it or not, I can't wait for tomorrow night, said Emily, relaxed. What about Sarah? Emily's head turned to look at Lily, shocked. What? What about Sarah? Lily repeated, chuckling at her wide-eyed friend. Oh, come on, you didn't seriously think I wouldn't find out, did you? Emily buried her face in her hands, blushing. How did you find out? Lily let out a snort. Well, it wasn't hard to miss. Why didn't you tell me? A figure on the side of the road held a fork and watched as the girls drove by. With a honk, Lily waved at the old man.
Well done. Thank you, Caroline. So the penultimate reader. I'd like to introduce Laura Staunton. Laura is working on a novel. She keeps sending me work. I've about 5 chapters on my machine now, my computer. But we did this test in the group where I say, do you know where the story is going? And I'll ask the group and then all throw forward their ideas. Nobody knew where this story was going. So that's always a great sign. So I'm going to introduce, because she's reading from chapter 3, it's really about a girl who has died, been mistakenly processed and put into hell, where the devil falls in love with her.
First she saw a dark black shiny shoe around the corner, followed by a leg sheathed in a crisp black pair of suit trousers. Finally, a whole body loomed before her, casting her in shadow. The man standing before her had a sneer set into his sharp face. His pale skin gleamed with a faint red tinge. His eyes were dark and seemed to glow. Ellie felt sick to the pit of her stomach, but her eyes wouldn't leave his face no matter how hard she tried to pull them away. Miss Cope told her to expect a formidable man called Luke. This must be Luke, Ellie thought. Luke glared down the bridge of his long chiseled nose into Allie's bright green moist eyes. His mouth turned into an unpleasant smile as he looked her up and down. So, Alexandra, isn't it? He asked in a deep gravelly voice, cocking one eyebrow. Allie gulped and gave a trembling, shaky nod. Luke pointed over to a slab of stone raised off the ground and motioned for Allie to take a seat. In a strange eagerness to do whatever this man told her to do, Allie tripped over to the seating and plunked herself down hard. As Luke saw the little wince that transformed her terrified face, he had to fight off a genuine smile. He walked slowly over to her with a dignified, frosty air, and his sneer once more took over his features. So, I expect you know who I am, he sneered down at her. The immense fear that gurgled through Allie's whole body prevented her from lying as she shook her head. No? Luke asked, trying to mask his surprise. He leaned forward, flashing a surprisingly bright, scary smile. Well then, Allie, you might know me as Lucifer, or maybe even the devil. Allie gasped and sunk lower down her seat as the devil leaned over her. As Luke stared into her deep green eyes, a strange feeling took hold of him. Something he had never felt before. An odd fluttering whispered through his veins, tying knots in his stomach. His heart, which had been virtually silent seconds earlier, was racing. He seemed to be locked into her eyes. Unnerved, he blinked, trying to break the glaze. Suddenly, he felt her tremble beneath him. He realised it was his close proximity that troubled her. Usually he revelled in people's discomfort, but for some reason now, he just wanted to ease Allie's discomfort. Rather than puzzle over this rapid change in his state of mind, he swiftly stood up straight and took a few steps back. The further he stepped away from Allie, the clearer his head became. Trying to disguise his uncertainty, Luke coughed and mustered up an approximation of his previous terrifying face. If it fell short, it was still enough to keep Allie shaking quietly. Well, I know you're not supposed to be here, but for the time being you're stuck, he grinned. These were the words Allie was dreading. A ball of hot, molten tears rose up like a lump of lead in her throat. Luke continued. However, he tried to look away from her. You won't be subjected to the usual punishments that our residents experience here. Allie shivered at the cold menace layered in his voice. Now, where shall we house you? Obviously, somewhere on your own. We wouldn't want anyone jealous of you. That would turn ugly fast. Allie gulped as she thought of what he meant by that. Luke was still talking, but she barely was registering his words. She faded out, wishing with all her heart she could just go home. So the only logical place left for you is the 5th floor, corridor D, right opposite my quarters. Allie jolted to attention. Luke was smiling slimily at her. She gaped She opened and gave it to him. He made a part, he ordered, before turning on his heel and leaving. Ali sat quivering for several moments until she finally managed to slide off her seat and slid through the highly polished black door. When it banged closed behind her, she leaned her back against it and slid down until she was left crouching on the floor, her head bent, resting on her hands.
Thank you very much. Okay, so our very last reader, very stylish reader, is Declan Cordial. And Declan is working on a fantasy novel. So Declan, I'd like you to come on up. Come on up. What's the name of your story? A Knight's Honour. There you go. Thanks, sir.
Zack was standing sheepishly as the king roared at him. All he had done was fall off a horse while training to be a knight. He didn't even like horses. He had dreamed of being a knight his whole life, running into battle, being a hero, protecting his friends, capturing his enemies. This wasn't his first offence. There were two others. He had refused to behead anything, even a scarecrow, and he had spoken at dinner. 3 strikes and you had to visit the king. This was Zack's third offence, and now he had to listen to the king screaming, "Will I have your head removed then, page?" Zack was about to say no, when 5 warriors wearing the jet black leather of the Northern Empire's army fell in through the large windows. Surrounded, Zack took hold of his sword, Shining Saviour, and grabbed one of the enemy's swords. Swinging Shining Saviour, Zack pounced, but 4 other identical swords intersected him, overpowered him, and flung Zack's sword towards the other end of the chambers. Shining Saviour embedded itself in the magnificently decorated door, which swung open with the force exerted on it, revealing 4 startled, wide-eyed guards dressed in golden armour. Shocked, they stood there for a minute, as Zack did his best to dodge and weave the sharpened steel of the enemy's blades. 3 of the guards roared and charged, brandishing their swords, while the other picked up Shining Saviour and lobbed it back towards the northern warriors. The 5 enemy swordsmen, upon hearing the guards' roars, turned around to see a sword fly past them. Zack slid to the floor, cradling his arms, which were covered with cuts and bruises. Seconds later, the king kicked him in the side and dropped Shining Saviour down by his leg. Sighing, Zack dragged himself up. He knew that a knight would never stop for rest when the king was in danger. He looked around. All 5 of the enemies had their backs to Zack and seemed to be overpowering 4 guards. Zack wasn't a killer. He didn't even like picking rats off his bed, and he wasn't going to kill any of these people, let alone from behind. He grabbed hold of one of their leather coats with sweaty, shaking hands and pulled. The warrior gave a sharp cry of surprise, fell back and sprawled on the ground. Zack stuck out a hand to help him up. The falling soldier looked at Zack with disgust and swiped at his outstretched hand with his palm, catching his palm. The enemy swordsman stared blankly at Zack before charging, a look of pure hatred on his face. "I'll kill you, you little run," he snarled in a deep, gruff voice.
Can I invite all the young writers up? Come on up. You did brilliantly. For the first time reading in public. Come on up, don't be shy. This has been a tough one, and I know Dennis would like to say a few words.